So today we have a great webinar today. We've got Lee Badman, who's going to be talking about enterprise WLAN in time of changing client culture. So without further ado, Lee, you should be able to steal controls back from me and share your screen. So let you go ahead and do that. Get all set up.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. Kind of getting confused by my own screen here. Whatever. I shall muddle through. I'm going to also, I'm not going to do a darn thing. There we go. I am going to stop my own video, so I'm not distracting me. So thanks for coming. I too am struggling with Zoom a little bit. I use it on occasion, but it's not my main thing. I'm in one of those places in my employment where we use a little bit of everything, and Zoom is probably the minority player. So it's not foreign to me. It's just not the main thing I use. But we're going to talk about enterprise wireless and what I'm calling a time of changing client culture. It's not like anything new is happening today. That hasn't been happening for years, but I do think that there are factors afoot that are heightening the effect, and hence the need to talk about it a little bit. So come on, let's get on with it. There's me for those of you who don't know me, just a little bit about me. When it comes to wireless, I am a CWNE number 200, and the rest is there. Wireless is great to be involved with, and I've been fortunate to be in it in a number of ways for too many years. I'm getting old. Well, thank you not to bring that up again. Today's topic: everything changes, and what I'm saying, not always for the better. I mean, it's inevitable. I tell my kids that all the time. Whenever they complain about something, it's nothing is forever. Everything changes, unfortunately. Hopefully it's for the better, but it's not always. And we're going to talk about a little bit of the good and the bad. And when I talk about the culture change, we're mostly talking about end users and how wireless gets used and the culture behind that. There's not going to be perhaps not any real answers to be given. No golden, go forth and do this one thing and your life will be better. This is more of a contemplation, reflection, hopefully some dialogue at the end of it. Wireless is pretty weird, though. I will say that as it has evolved, it hasn't really been in parallel with Ethernet. Ethernet's been kind of controlled and tight. Ethernet's kind of boring. You plug a wire in, and usually the device at the end is no more exotic than most things that you might plug in. It just wants to connect to the network, and it doesn't need a lot of care and feeding. Wireless is a whole different beast at times, as we'll see. A lot of room for nuance, a lot of room for imagination, a lot of room for what some people call innovation and other people call frustration, and they'll be talking about the same concept, just different viewpoints. So that's kind of where we're going. And as we go there, let me bring up the grumpy old man slide. Oops, got a really touchy, sorry about that. Got a really touchy touchpad here. So again, this is the grumpy old man slide. I'm assuming that some people that are in the audience may not be old enough to appreciate some of this, but let me give it a try. For those of us who have been with wireless Wi-Fi pretty much from day one, I promise things really have kind of changed. There was a time when Wi-Fi was kind of, it was an add-on and it was expensive, and it really wasn't taken for granted because it wasn't as commoditized as it was today. And this isn't Lee pining for the good old days. This is more just trying to state fact and give you context before we get to where we're going. Once upon a time, if you wrote good wireless policy, be it security or acceptable use, whatever, everything that falls under the heading of policy, it used to be pretty easy to enforce it. And we'll talk about how that has changed. And by, enforcement, I mean, somebody's doing something they shouldn't do, you locate them, point out their transgression and correct their behavior, and everybody moves on together. And that's even getting more difficult with where we've how we've moved down the timeline and how things have changed. Once upon a time, there was real motivation for users to play nice on the central wireless, and that's because it was the only game in town. You either play nice or you don't play at all. And people in our roles and our positions were able to influence that, both technically and managerially, procedurally. We could influence people's behaviors, and even that is changing. A big thing is, device types, client device types. There weren't so many of them. There wasn't the crazy variety of stuff we have in the client space that there is now. And most of all, there weren't a lot of alternatives. You go to a given location and you get what they've put out for wireless, and you either fit in and use it by their rules, or you don't, because you didn't have a lot of choices. And even that's changing. Kind of is what it is. But things used to be different. I'm pounding the table and saying so, and we're going to use that as a launching off point to moving on. Let's see if I can do this. Come on. There we go. Well, there's the way things used to be, and then we blinked and things evolved. Just like kids and dogs, our wireless baby grew up, got its own ideas. It started running with a bad crowd. Pretty soon it's smoking dope, living in a van down by the river, all of that stuff. As it evolved, it got cheap in a lot of ways. When I say cheap, I mean inexpensive. It used to be really expensive. Enterprise systems are still too freaking ridiculously expensive. But the rest of the market got to the point where almost anybody can do just about anything they want and not go broke. Amazon loves wireless, and wireless loves Amazon for all the junk you can get out of there. And it became, at least on the consumer side, a paradigm that anyone can do. You can, be the most technically illiterate person and buy a lot of stuff and get it going yourself without needing any help, which is a good thing in some ways and a bad thing in other ways. I talked about the limited device set client market set that used to be, and now we know that that is just anything but. There's just so much out there that now has a wireless adapter in it. And with those devices come a slew of approaches. And when I say approaches, how the thing is used, the environment that the maker intended it to go in. In order to use this, you must do blah, blah, blah. And it's one of the places things get really weird that we'll talk about. And again, being an older guy, when it comes to wireless, at least, it is absolutely my conjecture that generational views, especially on policy, have changed. The younger kids aren't really always all that interested in following the rules. Sometimes they want to make them as they go, or just flat out ignore them and push it to the limit. And again, it's just something I see a lot of places, and it's really not just kids. It's everybody. I do it too. I go places, I do things that I would get mad at me for doing in my own environment. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Again, it's just, mindsets change, but a lot of it is driven from, I talked about the evolution and where we came from. I think those of us who have been along for the ride the entire time have a greater appreciation for somebody's policy and, why it might have came to be. than the younger people that just grew up wireless. And, I should always be able to do anything I want because they've been spoiled that way and they missed a lot of what came before. Maybe that's a nicer way of putting it. Now I'm going to lay down some opinion here, a little bit of a sidebar, very much relevant to the topic, but a little bit of a diversion. And you can agree, disagree, but I'm throwing it out there, and is what it is. I am saying that along the way, a certain alliance failed us in this whole evolution. On the one hand, we've got a whole big consumer space when it comes to wireless, and then we've got what goes on in the enterprise, and they are two different beasts. And I'm saying that the Wi-Fi Alliance still to this day fails, and their members fail to really recognize that dichotomy and give it the respect it deserves and really needs to make things a little more functionally cohesive. Maybe I'm being an armchair quarterback, and if things were tighter, maybe there wouldn't have been as much quote unquote innovation, but we've really got a mess. When it comes to my what I'm saying here about the Alliance, just let me give you two things to think about. Two things, imagine if these two things had been done differently along the way, what kind of shape we would all collectively be in. If the Wi-Fi Alliance just said, well, this is a consumer device because it doesn't do these few things that are in any typical enterprise, 802.1x, for example, 802.1x security. We'll just leave it there in the interest of time. If it doesn't do 802.1x, it is not enterprise. Put a label on it that says consumer only. All of a sudden, there's going to be a lot of incentive for a lot of printer makers and everybody else to not want to be relegated to the consumer side of life. And maybe they would have been more in tune with what enterprise wireless is about. Just a thought. So let me leave that one there. And then the second thing I'm saying, that just imagine how much better life would have been if perhaps the members of the Alliance coordinated on Wi-Fi hotspots and all the ISP kind of home routers that go out there, the Eris and the Ruckuses of the world that the cable companies put out. And what if people actually didn't put out, use any stinking channel you want and find the best channel, and your neighbor's on 6, you'll be on 4, and everybody loses kind of stuff. I'm just saying things could have been, the housekeeping could have been a little bit better along the way, in my opinion, and that kind of contributes to the points that I'm hoping to make today. My conjecture. So we design for the enterprise, and I'll tell you what that means when I say the word enterprise. We'll expand on that a little bit. But everybody wants that stuff that we use at home to come to work too. As an end user, they don't want to hear that, well, your Chromecast wants this weird little broadcast thing that we can't do easily, blah, blah, blah. None of those details do they care about. The tolerance to be told, well, you can't do that. That thing you want to do doesn't fit here, so you can't do it. I'm finding that people are less tolerant of that. And the follow-on, they don't need us for everything anymore. We're not the only game in town. They now have a network in their pocket that they can whip out, and that's its own thing that we'll talk about. I mentioned the integration guide for the Chromecast. My biggest networks that I run, or the biggest network that I run, has about 4,500 APs. Daily count is around 32,000 clients. And then I go all the way down to, sites with 1 AP. It just astounds me that in the enterprise, if you want to integrate all of the consumer type junk into the enterprise and do it right, the vendors have add-ons. You can buy something like ClearPass, hope the fingerprinting works, and go broke doing it. to get a $20 gadget to work on the wireless enterprise or the enterprise wireless. To me, that kind of goes back to something's wrong here. That kind of weird, complicated glue that is sometimes glitchy and buggy. If we need that to make it all work, something didn't evolve right. Again, all I can give you is my opinion. Many device makers, and these are things that show up, in the enterprise environment, and people want to use them. People might be, your typical end user sitting at a desk. It might be facilities people that want to do something in the building, might be audio, visual, whatever. Across the board, the people that are making these products are fairly clueless about the environments that they want to sell into. But anyhow, when I talk about enterprise, before we leave this slide, I'm talking about things like security, which I mentioned on the last slide. The device just being flexible to use on a typical network without coming with a 2-page list of demands. This thing won't work unless you do this, 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 and this. And those are often just totally unrealistic in the enterprise network. Yeah, we'll leave it at that, again, in the interest of time. It just has to play nice on the quote unquote typical enterprise wireless network and have some security built into it. That's not a lot to ask. And at the same time, it very much seems to be, because we're not getting that. So continue the little sidebar conversation. The device makers that fail us, but they're putting out so many products and they want to be sold into so many spaces, they should know better. Give us a spare channel. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that out of wireless camera people. Yeah, we can't do anything that your network needs us to do. And yes, your network is standards based and pretty typical, but we still can't do any of that. So can't you just give us a spare channel? Yes, I will give up one of my precious channels in my gigantic environment to make up for what you didn't put under the hood. One I just dealt with, the middle top bubble there, the video extender maker could not fathom why it was so offensive that HTTP has to be enabled. And our security team just ripped them up. It's like, well, no, it's clear text passwords. You got to fix it. Well, why is that really all that important? Okay, well, we don't really want to redevelop. So then we jump over to the next one. Can't we just have our own VLAN that spans across your 300 buildings? These are conversations that you shouldn't have to have with people that understand networking, and a lot of times they don't understand networkings. That conversation about give us our own VLAN. In the last couple of years, I've dealt with that on time clock vendors. They want their own VLAN, or they want their own AP on its own VLAN with its own SSID per clock. And oh, by the way, we're going to have 300 of these clocks in your environment. I mean, just nonsensical requirements. The clocks, video extenders, washing machines, washer dryer controllers that they want to put on wireless. Those have all been some of the people saying that they want their own VLAN in the wireless environment. It's just insane. The down in the bottom left corner, the 802.1x thing, I'm still just absolutely confounded by printer makers. And one time I went through the exercise of, I think it was HP, trying to deal with their engineering team and explaining, you've got all the right words on your interface to do 802.1x wireless security, but nothing lines up. Nothing is what it seems. Nothing connects to the other thing that needs to connect to, and it just doesn't work the way you're giving it to us. It can't work, and here's why. And just, truly they did not understand it, and finally just, gave up. And it's just utterly bizarre. For as many printers go into wireless environments, that 802.1x is still something that is a mystery to most printer makers. And it goes on and on. In the middle there, the big long bubble. So many of these devices that should be clients end up getting left in the initial state where they're just a big loud access point. And you bring that up to the vendor that is problematic. You need to take that part of it out and let us set it up or do something with it another way, because these things just get left there. Well, so what? We're only using one channel, so what if we're on what feels like 10 watts, you can feel us for 6 city blocks. Why is that really a big deal? And you just can't find the right words to convey the problems with the way they're building their stuff. It's just absolutely maddening. But anyhow, let's get back to the topic, the culture thing. Again, it all kind of goes to the same place. Whether it's end users or the device makers, to me, it all goes to the same place. But let's get back to specifically the culture of users. And I'm guessing we're probably all guilty of the first bullet there. I damn well will get to the internet. If I can't do it on your network, I'll find a way. Anything I do wrong, it's your network's fault. I'm sure people listening can relate to that. Anything my device does wrong, basically any problem I run into in today's world, your network sucks. You're the cause of my problem. I'm going to push you aside and I'm going to move on without you. Now you get in my way, I'm just going to go right past you. And guess what? If I create problems for other people, well, I didn't create those problems. You did, because your network sucks because my password is wrong, or I never got my password for my account. Somehow that's your fault. And I'm just going to keep on rocking and rolling. Not my problem. Again, this is what I'm seeing. This isn't all just straight, university type stuff. This is in other business settings too. It's just kind of the world we're in. Think video killed the radio star. Again, if you're of a certain age, you might remember both the song and the video. But the thing that counts is underneath that unlimited data plans. They're kind of killing the old Wi-Fi cultures. Back to that point about how we're not needed all that much anymore, or we're not needed as much as we were. I mentioned that our wireless networks have competition. 3G, 4G, the hotspots have always kind of been a pain, but the unlimited data thing changes everything. Now it's not just something for the rich folk that can afford the unlimited data. The unlimited data plans have been commoditized, and there are people, doesn't matter how good your guest environment is, they are going to use their hotspot everywhere they go because that's what they're used to. It's just easy. It never gets turned off. Everywhere they go, they have quote unquote their internet. They don't have to think about anything. Doesn't cost them anything to use, so why not? That's has a lot of implications when you think about that. Now take those hotspots. They're you got the culture behind them that's changing, the usage culture. If you pay any attention, now we're getting them. They're dual band. Some of them, the true hotspots, maybe not the phones, but true hotspots, dual band. They're coming out of the box in fat channels. They land on our channels. They absolutely interfere. They tend to be louder than we are, overpowered, arguably, for something that's going to be at arm's length from wherever you're sitting. They're here. They're a mess. They're multiplying. I mean, that's just I can't say emphatically enough about how just the fact that the unlimited data plans are among us, what that means to hotspots and what those hotspots technically mean to our wireless environments. So do we really care that somebody's not on our network and finding another path to the internet for whatever they want to do? Probably not in most cases, although that's not going to hold true in financials and places where IP needs intellectual property and such needs to be managed and all of that. There are places where people violating policy and firing up a hotspot for violating non-technical policy. There's reasons why you don't want people finding these wormholes out to the internet that have nothing to do with your wireless network. In those environments, it's its own thing. But in every environment, the interference and all of that cannot be ignored, especially when you get a handful of these in a small place. And maybe it's an auditorium or classroom or, some important, board of trustees meeting, whatever. And, the central Wi-Fi is pretty important to what's going on, but all of a sudden there's 2 or 3 hotspots because that's what people are used to using. And now they're crushing the infrastructure wireless and nobody can get on. So they pull out their hotspots and now everybody's stepping on everybody. It's pretty bad at times. But again, it just kind of, it's where we are. On the hotspot topic, it's a line from a Ted Nugent song. This is not sexually suggestive. When in doubt, I whip it out. Talking about my hotspot, mind out of the gutter there. It ought to be the hotspot industry's catchphrase, whatever, in my opinion, because anything that happens, I bump into the slightest problem on the central network, that hotspot comes out and I'm seeing it. It comes out so that I can use the video extender. It comes out so I can use the whatever you can't easily do for me, I'm solving it with my hotspot. So, kind of how things have changed, in the textual format. Once upon a time, people would say, can I get the password? How do I get on, wireless? And now they say, I don't really need you. Once upon a time, people would say, come to you, knock on the door of your office. Hey, can I use this thing on my, on the, the wireless network that we all use? Or you get an email, I'm thinking about buying this and, will this work on our network? And that is giving way too frequently to the approach of, I'm going to buy it and I'm going to use it. And if you can't help me, I'll figure it out. Once upon a time, the help desk would get a lot of calls and, can you help me troubleshoot my Wi-Fi problem because your network is the only one I can use. I need to figure this out. Come help me. And now we're in a place where, as I've said several times now, if the network sucks, I'm just going to use my own. Policy, I come to you and say policy says, no, you can't do that. Everybody's got the right to be offended about everything these days. Everybody's got just so many opinions. So, where policy used to be, something that you could wave at people, too often now you get, talk to the hand. Not interested. Bust me. What's the punishment? I'm still going to do it. Just kind of very strange times. I'd be curious to see when we get to the, the end and there's time to talk, if anybody else agrees or disagrees with some of these points. Once upon a time, we kind of all acted under the heading of wireless, usually for the greater good. I'm not going to do this stupid thing because I know it's going to impact my neighbors. And now it's all about me. And I am absolutely as guilty as anybody when I say this. I'm not finding fault. I'm not being self-righteous. I'm in this mix and I'm on both columns there. I'm on both sides of the slide. So all that being said, now what? We came from a place of order and appreciation and reverence for wireless. And now I'm telling you that we're, it's kind of becoming chaotic and every man for himself. And, the industry evolved in a weird way where it's very messy and all over the place. All of that being called out in the light of day, I give you the question. So now what? I mean, do we just give up, walk away, quit our jobs? go drive trucks. What do we do here? Well, we do what we can do to keep the peace. It's still people dealing with people, and there's going to be give and take and negotiation and education, and some things you can give a little on, some you can't, depending on the situation and the environment. We do what we can do to keep the peace. No other way to put it, but that can take that can go in the direction of a lot of permutations. As a wireless guy, I am emphatically saying that some devices don't belong on wireless. They fit better on Ethernet or CBRS or LoRaWAN or whatever. We need to guide those conversations. Wireless is seen as easy and cheap and put everything on it, but it's not always the best fit. So if we can guide different clients to a better technology, some of our wireless problems go away. We accommodate, we educate where we can, and where we can't accommodate, at least hopefully we can be crystal clear on why we can't accommodate, and what the true issues are. And sometimes that's where it has to end. Instrumentation, this is like monitoring what's going on, has arguably never been more important. The messier that our Wi-Fi gets, the more you need good, actionable, accurate insights on what's going on. So when problems come up, we've got more and more self-induced problems. We need to be able to see them, in very meaningful ways, very technically meaningful ways. And then the bottom line is, you basically have to live with what you can't control. At least most of us. Very few of us are in environments where we can absolutely be the wireless sheriff and lay down edicts that you can actually get somebody fired for violating policy or whatever. I mean, most of us are not in that world. At the end of it, when we've tried everything, we have to live with what we can't control. And if there are problems that people have agreed to live with, or potential problems, just need to document, in this such and such room, there's this oddball device, and this is what I expect it to do to the network. And these are the people that are probably going to be impacted, yet everybody is signed on for that. And, it is what it is, kind of thing. You can only go so far, you can only do so much. So the tragedy of the commons, I know that expression comes up pretty frequently when people talk about wireless. Really, it's unlicensed spectrum. Because it's unlicensed, and because the standards are kind of so loose, and the Wi-Fi Alliance has been so loose with things, we find, the unlicensed thing and everything that goes with it, there's a lot of innovation, there's a lot of ignorance, there's a lot of tension, a lot of headbutting. It's always been like that. It's just getting more perhaps prolific these days. And again, I chalk a lot of that up to just the explosion of device types and the hotspot unlimited data plan thing. I think those are two big, huge drivers that get us to this heightened state of bizarreness, if you will. But on another hand, things really haven't changed that much. It's just that perhaps a larger scale of problems that we've always had. So with that, hopefully we've got a little bit of time. I'm not watching my clock. How are we doing, Heather?
Oh, we're doing great. We're doing great, and a very active chat panel. One thing I do want to mention, Lee and I were talking about this before the webinar. The snoring you hear in the background is a dog. No one's asleep. I got a Slack message from someone on my end asking if someone fell asleep, but of course not, just the dogs.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's a 14-year-old pug dog that I can't put in another room or she'll go ape. So I apologize.
Yeah, we've gotten very lucky that my dog hasn't started freaking out. He's right down here. So I think we all get that life, but very active chat panel. So I know we're still kind of working on the format here. So if you do have questions, make sure they get in the Q&A panel. Otherwise they can get a little bit lost. But I think honestly, it's mostly people agreeing with you, which is always great to hear. But we have some conversation just about how, if the wireless was Keita's saying, fast, free, and frictionless, no captive portals, nothing like that, then people would be using it. But with all the captive portals and things like that, and especially like you were talking about with the access to unlimited data, it's kind of just like, why? Like, why am I going to connect to your wireless when I have my own that I know is going to work and is more reliable? So kind of branching off that, we do have a question from Anonymous. So what are the solutions for all these problems? I know that's a little bit of a loaded question for you, Lee, but I'm going to throw it at you and see what you got.
Well, every situation is different. You know what I mean? So the whole notion of, if no captive portals and, everything ought to just be fast and no obstacles whatsoever. The problem I have with that is that boils down every wireless environment to being identical, and it kind of implies that every place you go is a universal, ought to be a universal guest wireless environment with, the public in mind. Anybody can just wander in off the street and just do whatever the hell they want in any one of your spaces. That might work out in a hotel. It might work out in a library. It might work out at the bus station and perhaps conference centers. That's not businesses. Businesses do not owe the general public, a lot of businesses don't owe the general public free wireless with no captive portal. I just don't buy into that.
Mm-hmm.
I do know, so that is one point that kind of bothers me a little bit. Every place is entitled to have their own operational policy, their own security policy, whatever. Maybe I don't want you on my wireless at all. And if you do wander into my space and you fire up your hotspot, I'm still subject to your interference. And back to the tragedy of the commons, I'm kind of stuck with it. I can ask you to turn it off. I can ask you to leave because you're screwing up my voice over IP or whatever, but it just gets thorny. There is no universal answer to all of this. I do know that from the client side, you can go one of two ways and say, if we're going to accommodate every freaking client out there that people want to use in their living room, your only real choices are to open up a totally open network that maybe just goes to the network and tell anybody, or to the internet and tell anybody to do any darn thing they want, or you're going to have to invest in some of this very expensive middleware, glue, fingerprinting stuff. Or you say no to certain device types. There is just no one single answer to this complexity, given the device types that are in play.
Yep, totally makes sense. And Keith's in the comments, he loves the reference of tragedy of the commons. That is a definition of Wi-Fi, most certainly. Let's take one more here. So we've got Anonymous asking, can one ban cellular MiFis as part of wireless policy?
I'm sorry, say the beginning of that again.
Can one ban cellular MiFis as part of wireless policy?
One can try. Whether it's going to stand up, I mean, you can certainly ask people to, you can point out the thing that you're doing is interfering. Are you having trouble getting on our network that we would rather you be on? Can I help you to get there? Is all of that a ban? Maybe it's a soft ban, but to tell people I'm going to be the FCC and tell you that you can't use your licensed and unlicensed thing in my space, that has been proven, at least in some cases, to be a very expensive fine at the end of the attempt, especially if you then do containment and all of that silly stuff. At the same time, forget about Wi-Fi hotspots for a minute. And if somebody sets up anything that interferes, can you go down to the conference room and point out to somebody, your microwave is really interfering with wireless. It's leaky. You got to buy a new microwave. Can we do that? I mean, you can try anything you want. How it's received is going to vary.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I think that's kind of the battle here. And we can fight about it on Twitter, because I know that it sounds like there's just people on both sides of the fence. You want to give the people what they want, but how much of that is going to affect your operations, your business, and, giving the people want versus your choices, like you were saying, your personal business operations. It's interesting to see some of these comments. So we can fight about it on Twitter later, but I think that's a wrap on that one. Any final thoughts, Lee?
No, just other than, like I say, I know that this is the entire topic is fraught with opinion and room for opinion. And the only thing I would say is, boy, it really needs to be talked about. And, people share ideas and all of that. But in those discussions, when you start, if any of us start laying down absolutes, every wireless network ought to be blah, blah, blah. I right off the bat, I get turned off. It just kind of takes away like I say, the recognition that, different environments serve different purposes. They have different goals, different rules, different policies, and businesses are absolutely entitled to that. So in your discussions, be nice to each other and try to see the nuance.
Absolutely. Yep. All right, good stuff. Well, thank you so much, Lee. Really, really appreciate that. I know everyone really seemed to enjoy this session and kind of, feels the pain of this topic. So good stuff. Keith Parsons, be nice to each other. Agreed. Yes, we will all be nice. No real fighting on Twitter, just good discussion. And we'll kind of leave that there. And now I think it is time for Mr. Camuli. There he is. All right. So we are moving into 7 minutes with 7 Signal. This is a little section at the end of our webinars where we speak about a little nugget or little feature of our products related to the topic at hand. So Eric, the floor is yours. You should be able to steal controls here just by sharing your screen. But let me know.
All right, let's shot. So here we go, guys. So 7 minutes with 7 Signal. We're going to unpack a little feature inside of our software here relating to the topic today. And we've been talking about the culture. And we've been talking about, when we were all little kids, we learned how to share, right? But, we maybe need to change the culture and teach our kids how to share the air, right? We take it for granted. And so, the way to win this battle is through diplomacy, hearts and minds, through education. And a great way to educate people is with a pretty picture. So what I've prepared today are a few pretty pictures for you that hopefully will go a long way. If we can share little pictures with people as to what is actually happening in the unseen frequency bands, then perhaps we can further that education, we can educate the culture, and we can get people playing nice and being nice to one another based upon the fact that we've enlightened them. Okay, so check this example out on the screen right here. Can you see that, Heather?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, great. So this is an apartment building. Oh boy, and isn't the ISP so smart and intelligent to basically hand out wireless routers to everybody in the building and have them all be 80 megahertz wide and have them all stacked up on the same channels. I mean, this is like bumper to bumper traffic, guys. This is going to be slow as molasses, especially in the evening hours when everybody's trying to use it. Now, because we have this little system in place, we actually can now see the lay of the land. And we can see the unintelligent actions of our ISP, and we can take evasive actions accordingly, right? And so what we did in this case is, if you look all the way to the right side of your screen, you will see that we were able to go into the router, and identifying what's going on here, we were able to see that channel 165 was a viable option for this person. And so we put their router on 165, and even though it's only a 20 megahertz wide channel, the lack of contention, the lack of interference allows them to have a much more consistent Wi-Fi experience. And the problems have gone away. What do you think of that? Okay, so let's look at another example, shall we? All right, let's go up here. Here's another example. Great looking channel plan, right? Using a 20 megahertz wide channel plan, using a variety of Uni 1, 2, and 3 channels. Looking good, looking good. This is in the enterprise. Okay, looking good, looking good. What is this? Okay, this is, again, what we're talking about here. We've got people setting up shop, all right, using an 80 megahertz wide channel. Here's a 40 megahertz wide channel. Look at this. It's JM1001. Who is that? I don't know. Okay, here, what about, here's Jordy. Jordy setting up a hotspot, using his iPhone, using his own router. I don't know. Is Jordy a person, a place, a thing? I don't know, but it is now interfering. Again, when I have the information in front of me, I now have the opportunity to maybe walk over to the area, identify the culprit and say, hey, you know, in my diplomatic fashion, in an attempt to maybe create a bit of an enlightenment in the situation here, let me show you what you're doing and let me show you how it actually has an impact on everybody else. And maybe if Jordy is kind of receptive to the idea of sharing and playing nice with others, and in seeing the picture, they will in fact comply or oblige out of the goodness of their hearts, right? All right, let me show you another one, guys. Let me show you another one. Here we go. So this is a 40 megahertz wide channel plan. Okay, and actually I'm seeing a lot of stacking on top of one another, a little bit of contention taking place. You know, maybe a 20 megahertz wide channel plan would do this person a little bit better good, quite frankly. But again, look at what we have over here. Somebody brought in their old Netgear. They went down to Best Buy or whatever, picked up a Netgear router, and they set up shop. And boy, it looks pretty loud too. And so that's going to be interfering with all of these folks that are on these radios, these access points. And this is no good. Again, the opportunity to visibly see what's happening. And then as we stick with our topic today, changing of the culture through education and empowerment, having a picture like this can certainly go a long way in winning hearts and minds. Okay, and then I want to show you just one final one, if I may. There we go. And this is at 7 Signal. In our office building, you can see we do the interference analysis where we can see all of the different enterprise networks that are supposedly around us. When we look at the airwaves, oh my goodness, it is a mess. Okay, and so a lot of your office buildings that are multi-tenant may look similar. It is unfortunate that there's just, it's like the Wild West out there with a variety of 80 megahertz wide, 40 megahertz wide, 20 megahertz wide channels and all of this overlapping. The best thing that we can do is use the system in order to identify where it's noisiest and then set up shop where it's not. Okay, short of knocking on somebody's door and saying, hey, can you cut it out, please? What we use is 7 Signal in order to identify the areas of the spectrum that are a little bit more quiet. Hey, it's really noisy in here. Why don't we step outside and have a nicer conversation where we don't have to yell? And that's exactly what we're trying to do here. All right, guys. Well, that's what I had for you today. A little action here and looking at the air, looking at the spectrum and what is really going on as I move my laptop from this building to that building, from this room to that room, from that floor to this floor. The environment is ever changing. It's a living, breathing animal, guys. And I'll tell you what, just to remind you, you and me, we can't see or hear Wi-Fi, but 7 Signal can. Thanks for joining us, everybody.